I think it is time to question the unbelievable hubris with which food scientists are once again approaching what we place into our mouths. With lab-grown meat becoming a commercial reality more and more quickly by the day, and the constant peppering and praise from the mainstream media with ethical, environmental, and sustainability claims.
Well, it looks like meat, supposedly tastes like meat, and it's technically meat.
Aren't you at least a little curious about what could be hidden behind the scenes? What the unintended consequences may be? Listen, I was excited for lab-grown meat as well, or at least the potential of it. I mean, how could you not be? But like most people, I've got questions, and way more questions when something is hailed as a magical panacea that is going to solve climate concerns, world hunger, pollution. I think it's foolish of any human to blindly cheer while this slowly gets rolled out without a healthy dose of skepticism. And when this does become commercially available, it's worth asking if you should be in line or if you should be waiting to see how the other test subjects, see how the other citizens handle it. So to answer this monumental question, we're going to break this down into a few different subjects. 1, how it's made, and if it's practical at scale. 2, the real cost. 3, the ethical, environmental, and spiritual implications. I almost didn't include this, but this came up way more than I had expected it to. 4, if this is going to be another case of startups overpromising and underdelivering. 5, the taste and nutrient concerns.
The way the cells are grown would also have probably some marginal differences in kind of the overall nutritional value.
6, some real quick questions that I just could not get any answers to, and hopefully one of you can find it for me. And 7, I am going to put on my conspiracy theory hat and cover some of the most worrying things that I found that, if history has anything to say, are probably going to be closer to an eventual reality than they are not. This topic is complicated and messy, but trust me when I say we're going to be hitting this from every single angle that we can. I'll be doing an Amazon gift card giveaway in this episode like I always do. Just toss a comment in this episode and you'll be entered. And if you like deep dives like this and this is your first time, I do them every week. So make sure to subscribe and stick around. And with all that out of the way, my name's Andrew with Pride. Let's get into it. Let's briefly cover what lab-grown meat actually is and how it's made. Scientists take a small sample of animal cells, such as muscle cells, and toss them into a bioreactor with a growth factor, glucose, salt, and amino acids. It has to be 100% sterile, as even a little bit of contamination will ruin the entire batch. We add nutrients and CO2 to it over time while removing the waste products that cells make. Basically, it takes a lot of money and precision with virtually no margin for error. There's something important there some of you may have missed though. Growth factors? Kind of sounds like what grass and water might do for a cow. 100% sterile? Kind of sounds like an immune system. A cow can be in a factory farm or free on a pasture with absolutely no sterilization required. Removing CO2 and waste products? I'm pretty sure a cow has 3 organs that already do that. So all this money, all this precision, just to recreate something that a cow does naturally and that it figured out nearly 11,000 years ago. This probably goes without saying, but replicating nature is not just hard, it's very expensive, and this is far from the first time that humans have tried to do it. For those of you that are currently somewhat health conscious, it's also worth asking, where are they going to be sourcing the ingredients for the growth mediums that are going to be used in this lab-grown meat? It's no different than looking at grass-fed beef or grain-fed beef. Things have got a different nutrient profile based on what they are fed on, or grown in, I suppose. If the base used for the amino acids in the bioreactors comes from soybeans and the dextrose is coming from corn, there's a high likelihood that those are both going to be from GMO monocrops that are subsidized by the government. As I've already kind of alluded to, and as I've said in past episodes, it's not just what you eat, but also what you eat eats.
We are here in Singapore, and we're going to be trying lab-grown meat.
I looked all over for real places that are currently serving lab-grown meat, and I found many with plans to, and even claims of prices at $17 a pound, but I could only find one place that actually is right now. It's called 1880 in Singapore. They've got a little 6-ounce chicken nugget that is about $23 or $61 a pound. A chicken nugget is structurally much more simple than a steak, though. There's a reason that a lot of the lab-grown meat that you see is ground beef, hamburgers, and chicken nuggets, right? It's basically just mush that gets shaped and breaded. And granted, $61 a pound sounds crazy, but some people are expecting a pound of meat to be more like $138 a pound. So we're just going to assume that range to work with. Good Meat, the meat division of the company Eat Just, who you may know as the company with that awful vegan mayonnaise or the egg substitute, just signed a deal to have 10 250,000 liter bioreactors made. Those are going to have the capacity to make about 30 million pounds of meat, which sounds like a lot, but without even factoring in the cost of the equipment and the ingredients to make the meat, if just one of those bioreactors gets contaminated, it is going to cost somewhere between $180 and $414 million in lost revenue. And while that 30 pounds might sound impressive, keep in mind that we have 330 million Americans who average 274 pounds of meat a year. That's not even including seafood, and that comes out to a total of 90,420 million pounds of meat, meaning that 30 million will barely be covering 0.033% of our intake. And most scientists agree that Eat Just is being very, very optimistic with their volume projections. And remember that 6-ounce chicken nugget that I mentioned earlier? For the same price, you can make about 50 pounds of chicken nuggets from normal chicken. The Good Food Institute says that interest and investment in the lab-grown meat industry is nearly at an all-time high, with $896 million invested in 2022 alone. That brings the total invested into the industry to nearly $3 billion. But they also say that they're going to need $450 million just to get a baseline plant operational. And that plant is only going to be making 20 to 30 million pounds of meat. But again, even that is still optimistic. And don't forget that I mentioned investors here, by the way, because we're definitely going to be going into detail about that later. Josh Tetrick from Good Meat says it could be up to $650 million just to make one of these plants. But what both of these companies aren't saying is that this is likely lowballing. Both of these companies have to keep these investors interested, right? With all that, how is this ever going to be affordable for the common person? The most optimistic claims have this at $17 a pound of meat. And that's only using 20,000 liter bioreactors. That is barely 8% the size of the ones that Good Food Institute and Good Meat are crossing their fingers for. This doesn't even take into account the markup for stores though. With a pound of real beef costing an average of $5, the store markup for meat averaging about 35%. That brings the total for lab-grown meat to roughly $26 a pound. And again, this is the price that we're told, assuming everything goes to plan. This is the optimistic price. So by 2030, we can hope in the best case scenario to spend more than 5 times what we currently do just for lab-grown meat. Even with average inflation rates, by 2030, a pound of ground beef is barely going to be over $6. What about climate change though? These proposed labs are in the ballpark of $500 million to create, with currently unknown greenhouse gas emission levels.
This is better for the environment.
I mean, in the future, that's the hope. I would say right now, it's pretty unclear.
Though I am going to talk about that later. Let's assume it's 0 for argument's sake. If my math is right, that would mean to make just a 1% dent in the meat market and its emissions, it will cost, on the low end, nearly $17 billion for a 1% reduction. But that again still assumes the labs will be sustained completely by renewable energy and that they will have 0 emissions. And these emissions don't even take into account the mining and all the supply line needs just to manufacture these facilities. And we don't have time to go into it in detail, but it is worth mentioning. According to Dr. Frank Mitloehner, who is something of an expert on this, if the entire US went vegan for a year, which we know it won't, that would only decrease greenhouse gas emissions by 2.6%. By the way, did I mention his entire job is researching ways to decrease the environmental impact of livestock? So why is this being presented to us as a climate solution when it doesn't even look like cutting all meat consumption would even matter? I'll link the transcript for the full interview below for those who are curious, by the way. It is worth checking out. But worse than that is that according to this study that is currently undergoing peer review, the lab-grown meat industry at scale could release between 4 and 25 times more emissions than the entire global beef industry as it is today. I saw some people propose that lab-grown meat could be vegan, as well as halal and kosher, and I think it actually has some merit to it. Let me explain. If you take something and go far back enough in its history, it will inevitably be preceded by some use of animal cruelty, either directly or indirectly. If you thrift a leather jacket, you technically didn't support the industry that killed the animal. Cruelty-free products use science, machines, and processes that were first developed through or with the intention of being used on animals. Being that they now have cruelty-free application, or that you didn't directly support the animal harm, wouldn't it kind of make it okay in the same way? If the first cells taken to begin that process were taken years and years ago, like that leather jacket, for example, and the cells were taken in accordance with kosher and halal guidelines, wouldn't the final product over time be acceptable? Put another way, Tootsie Rolls. Did you know that ever since they were made, they take the last little bit of every single batch and toss it in to start the next one? Sure, in theory, it's possible that you are consuming the very first Tootsie Roll ever made, but it is unlikely. As one YouTuber said, I think we all get caught up in the hard and fast rules and definitions for vegan and vegetarianism. Personally, I think cultivated meat is mind-blowing. If there is an ethical way to eat meat for both planet and animals, I'm here for it. Few people will look at the modern conveniences of life and dig into the fact that almost none of civilization was built on vegan, halal, or kosher practices. But for lab-grown meat, there does seem to be a little bit of agreement in two areas.
It would need to come from a kosher species of animal. So it still retains the identity of the animal that it came from, if we could put it like that.
The cell is taken from the pig and it is made into flesh, then still you are eating the flesh of or a meat of a pig.
So animals that aren't halal or kosher still are not. So basically, no bacon, no pork sausage.
If you have slaughtered the animal properly, and you have preserved part of that meat and you are using it in the lab, and then you're producing meat from that, it's halal.
As I said earlier, it's got to be slaughtered properly.
But here's the problem. Many lab-grown meat companies are taking cells from animals still alive, and killing animals kind of goes against their ethos of no animals were harmed in the making of this burger.
It may well be that only if the cells are taken after slaughter would the lab-grown meat be kosher.
Time will tell, but this generally seems to mostly have a green light as far as religious contexts go. I suppose the vegans still need to argue it out. But are these food engineers getting in over their heads? It's clear that though lab-grown meat can be made, its scalability is somewhat in question. So all these investors aren't throwing money at what is, they're throwing it at a promise of what may be.
Wow! The land of make-believe!
If you've ever been in sales, you know the importance of a story.
Stories.
You know that before a product is real enough for somebody's wallet, it needs to be real in their heads. If startup culture has shown us anything, thank you Silicon Valley, it is that sometimes the promises are just too much to keep up with. And South Park actually has a whole episode about this. And what's even crazier is it was made all the way back in 2014.
Remember our company plan, guys. Start up, cash in, sell out, bro down.
A company that does what?
No, we don't want to do anything.
Yeah, that's why we want to have a startup company.
Boys, there's more to starting a company than having a catchy name.
No, there isn't.
Investor hype will rise and rise and rise until eventually it plateaus. If those profits don't start turning. And then the promises start suddenly feeling like outright exaggerations, if not lies. Some of you might be thinking, yes, but lab-grown meat is still fairly new. And that's kind of true, but the truth is, this has been an idea since 1931, nearly 100 years ago. Winston Churchill wrote an article where he imagined what a world would be like 50 years from now. He said, with greater knowledge of what are called hormones, i.e. the chemical messengers in our blood, it will be possible to control growth. We shall escape the absurdity of growing a whole chicken in order to eat just the breast or wing, by growing these parts separately under a suitable medium. But 1981 was a bit too hopeful. It was actually 20 years later, in 2020. NASA actually grew, of all things, some goldfish muscle, and then later some turkey. Even PETA was involved in this. In 2008, they offered $1 million to whoever could produce commercially viable lab-grown meat, as long as it was approved in 10 states. It didn't happen, but in 2013, someone ate the first lab-grown burger. which had an incredible cost of $330,000. But let us take a break for a sec and talk about something else. Oh God. Joe Fassler wrote an incredible article about this in 2021 with a pretty sobering graph showing that these promises began back in 2005, with the earliest projected completion date being 2008. The latest projection now is 2031, and that prediction comes from 2021. Remember what I said in the beginning?
Sheer fucking hubris.
So I'd like to share a quote with you from the CEO of Eat Just, the company that wants those one-of-a-kind 250,000 liter bioreactors.
Just because you can do something in the lab does not at all mean you can do something at commercial scale.
Remember, those reactors will likely max at making only 30 million pounds of meat. And the other experts in this field say that at that size, it just won't work. This is Yaakov Nachmias, the CEO and founder of Believer Meats.
When you start talking about a 20,000 liter bioreactor, it's the size of a 3-story building. Like any scuba diver knows, if you go under the water 10 meters, you already change the pressure. You have this massive bioreactor, but the cells on the bottom and the cells on the top are living in a very different environment.
This is someone in the industry who wants a similar goal, who wants this success.
We can talk about 50,000 liter bioreactors, but those are already going to be out of the scope of what most of the industry feels comfortable with. And those that talk about, 250,000 liter bioreactors are daydreaming, probably.
Yeah.
But even he can't help but laugh at the absurdity of these reactors. And remember, these labs have to be spotless, completely disinfected.
There's been a contamination.
This isn't like brewing beer in your backyard while you're grilling and playing cornhole and your uncle's smoking a cigar next to you. And even if it were, brewing a 12-pack of your own beer costs less than $100. Even one mistake in these massive machines could take down an entire reactor. Well, luckily enough, I spoke with a client who works on some of these relatively large reactors, and she actually gave me the numbers that it costs to clean these, and I did have to extrapolate a little bit, but let's run some sobering numbers for a 250,000 liter bioreactor. Shall we? The cost of the disinfection solution, depending on the type and brand, may vary from $40,000 to $150,000. Labor is going to take a handful of people, which could range from $5,000 to $20,000 or more, depending on the complexity and the duration of the disinfection process. There's loads of specialized equipment such as pumps, nozzles, monitoring systems, which may be necessary and could cost anywhere from $5,000 to $30,000 or more. And then waste disposal and adherence to safety regulations. That could be around $2,000 to $10,000 or more. So if we consider the standard chemical disinfection methods, the estimated cost could range from $52,000 to $210,000 or more. And that is without even factoring in the sterilization protocols required for every individual that is cleaning them and all the air filtering that's going to be required. And the kicker to this, it still isn't foolproof. So where is all this money coming from? Why is everyone so confident? Well, it comes from a common thing that most people are taught at some point in their life, and that Silicon Valley has found a way to exemplify. Fake it till you make it.
Hey, this guy's a great big phony!
Remember, like I said, people like a good story.
There's nothing in the world more powerful than a good story.
They need to believe in something before they can feel confident investing in it. And confidence can be sown quickly with just one big mover buying in. Many of these startups are just becoming giant houses of cards propped up by one investor believing that all the others have done their due diligence, and all the others believing that those ones have done theirs. Essentially seeing all that investment as proof, obviously, that they can join in with their own. Quibi, for example, was a short-form mobile streaming platform that raised around $1.75 billion in funding.
And it's gone.
I assume it was meant to rival TikTok, but in just 6 months after its launch, it shut down. Or Theranos, which raised an estimated $700 million.
And it's gone.
WeWork raised nearly $23 billion.
It's gone. It's all gone.
And even brands that we see daily, like Uber, which has raised $25 billion, but has lost $32 billion.
And it's gone!
Throwing more money at these companies hasn't made them profitable. It hasn't kept them afloat. So why would it make lab meat any cheaper? Well, that's when we run into something that's called Moore's Law. Moore's Law is a principle proposed by Gordon Moore. one of the co-founders of Intel back in 1965. He observed that the number of transistors on a computer chip, basically these teeny tiny little switches, doubled approximately every 2 years, while the cost of making these chips stayed the same or even decreased. Put more simply, Moore's law suggests that technology keeps advancing at a rapid pace and the price either stagnates or goes down. The problem is that we're starting to see Moore's law level off a little. Think of it like having a pool and every day you double the amount of marbles in it. At first, it seems like you're going to be able to keep going on and on forever. But over time, you will start to notice that that endpoint is coming faster and faster. Moore's law explains how we were able to go from computers the size of apartments to iPhones in our pocket, but that leveling off is also part of the reason that phones, computers, and laptops have all seemingly stagnated recently. It's a safe bet to say that lab-grown meat will become cheaper, but it will also plateau at some point, and with the already $3 billion invested, it's a big gamble hoping that Moore's law is in their corner to make lab meat more affordable. So if lab meat gets to the point where the average person can afford it, the question then is, will it even taste good? And for that matter, will it even really be meat?
It is 100% meat.
Because it will taste like animal meat, because that's exactly what it is.
The result is actual animal flesh.
In blind taste tests, when the tester is given lab-grown meat and real chicken, people are often surprised to find that they have guessed the incorrect one to be real. But I don't think that's honestly that surprising, at least not as it seems at first. When you're given a 50-50 option on something and the focus is how it tastes, what you're really choosing is the flavor you enjoy the most. Pure fruit juice versus a processed one, for example, most people would probably choose the sweeter option. If, however, you placed 9 real fruit juices and 1 fake juice, that taste discrepancy is much more obvious. I've covered hyper-palatable foods on this channel many times. If I can find a good one, I'll link it right above me. But what this shows is not that lab chicken tastes like chicken. Chicken is, after all, something that takes the flavor of whatever you add to it. What it shows is that chicken has a plain enough flavor that it can be compared to almost anything, from snake to alligator. Oh, that tastes like chicken. It also just shows that humans like palatable food above all else. There are 2 ways to look at this. One is excitement at how they can engineer flavor. The other is caution and fear at how they can engineer flavor. As I showed earlier, Yaakov Nachmias said his goal is to decrease the fat in meat and make it taste even better.
I want to have a chicken breast that is healthier than salmon. I want to significantly reduce the amount of saturated fat in the products, right? I don't want it to be as fatty as regular meat.
In this article from Time, they say it tasted like chicken, but it had none of the fat. So while they demonize saturated fat for the seemingly 1000th time, let's remember historically what food companies did to make food taste better when they removed all the fat, sugar, and a lot of it. Right before we started demonizing fat in the 1980s, we were averaging 80 pounds per person every year, with it peaking at 120 pounds per person. That is a 50% increase because we said fat was bad, but still needed a way to make food taste good. We can look at vegan meat as well for how they may create these flavor profiles. They are, after all, taking plants and I'd say doing a decent job at recreating the flavor, consistency, and appearance of meat. But again, how are they doing that? The Beyond Burger, for example, has a whopping 20 ingredients in it. And maybe you're thinking, yeah, but those are plants. Well, to answer that question from earlier, I have some unfortunate news for you.
I think the first generation of products of everybody in the field are going to be hybrid. They're going to combine plant proteins for texture and then animal cells for the flavor and the aroma and everything we experience from meat.
And let's also remember the addition of trans fats to make foods more shelf stable, and honestly ask the question, how will they be engineering the flavors that we know and love? And how many things are going to be added that they presume today are harmless, only for us to later find out it is anything but? Here's a few questions I just could not find answers to, and if you've got answers, please drop them. Can this be done on humans? Not as like a cannibalistic thing, though I'm sure some have considered it, but for organ transplants, skin, hair, body parts that get impacted from disease, can we replace those? And is this different from cloning? How is it different from cloning? Is it more ethical than cloning? Will we be able to make things like leather or fur coats from a biopsy? If this does become more viable, how long is the road to making affordable Wagyu and tomahawk steaks? And now for my conspiracy theories, because you guys asked for it. I'm actually going to put a tinfoil hat on for this one. We know nutrient quality of fruits and veggies has been on the decline for decades now. Dr. William Albrecht was actually showing this nearly 100 years ago. And while there are many causes, not limited to our absolute destruction of topsoil due to monocropping, there is a lot to be said about how humans have tried to hack nutrition, nature, and diets. As processed food has increased, the vitamins and minerals in them has decreased. So we increase the synthetic vitamin consumption, which could be a whole video on its own. So this begs the question, how will they add micronutrients to lab-grown meat?
The health aspects of it, I think, are not, that's not really the interesting question. It really is, can it be, made sustainable? Can the cost be driven down? Right. Things of that nature.
If you have ever heard the term grass-fed or grain-fed, the reason that those matter is because it impacts the nutrient quality of the meat that you're eating. I'm inclined to believe that what scientists will do, however, is the synthetic vitamin approach, assuming that they're able to add any micronutrients at all, which, according to this phenomenal article from 2020, is unlikely with our current technology. I wish I found that article at the beginning of this, by the way, because it answered so many questions. If we take the low nutrient quality conspiracy to its endpoint, it's worth asking about organ meats as well, due to the sudden resurgence as part of a healthy diet thanks to how packed they are with micronutrients. Why is there no effort to recreate these? See, most people think of meat as just muscle, which is somewhat true. Lab-grown meat grows as more of a goop, though. They call it cell slurry.
I call our product Little Lisa's patented animal slurry.
They spread it out on these thin sheets to give it a meat-like shape, but they aren't able to recreate blood vessels, tendons, ligaments, nerves, and fat cells.
Interestingly, under the law, no blood can be there, and generally no bone. For us, it was breaking that down to figure out what makes meat tasty, what makes meat meat.
This is one of the reasons that you only see chicken nuggets and ground beef. Like I said, it's already mush. But all of these missing components are highly nutritious factors about meat that we're going to be missing out on, and we don't know what that means for our diet. Another worry is, did you know processed and boxed foods were at one time only for the wealthy? Who's the primary consumer of them now, though? People in poverty. This is called democratization. Designer foods, much like everything, begin immediately with the wealthy, who try it out, they test it out, and eventually it finds its way down to those in poverty, the same way that you see homeless people with cell phones now. And as a tangent, you might be surprised to learn that most wealthy people severely limit not only their own phone time, but also their children's. It makes you think, right? If it does become affordable, will lab meat be yet another nutritionally devoid, harmful thing left over to people who don't know or just can't afford better? With one of the claims about lab meat being the clean nature of it, as opposed to the often antibiotic-ridden factory farms, what will stop these bioreactors from becoming just massive breeders of antibiotic-resistant superbacteria? Next, we have cancer. According to this patent from the early 2000s, the cells and the growing process is similar to that of cancer cells. They, in theory, grow as long as the habitat is conducive and the nutrients are still provided. The reason that worries me is there has been a bro science belief out there for years that eating animals that were pumped full of growth hormone would make you get bigger, and it turned out that that was mostly true. Of course, hormones ingested don't discriminate to just our muscles. And while I'm not making an absolute claim here, this is something we're not going to have answers for several years, if not decades. And I think that is a major cause for concern, and I wonder if the transparency around this is even going to exist. Okay, I have to tighten my tinfoil hat for this one a little bit. When lab meat is fully commercialized, what is going to happen is people will start making content about it. Not like this, they're going to be trying it out and remarking on the taste, and this has already begun.
This is chicken.
That's chicken.
Like it's a crunchy, normal piece of chicken.
I'm eating chicken.
A few years are going to go by, and the government will cherry pick some data and show that lab meat is in fact, better for us. And it's great for the environment. I know, it's a real stretch, saying that the government would do something unethical or be corrupt. It would be a shame if you searched up my episode PFM 52 and watched my episode about the FDA. Anyway, they will use that as cause to block out the smaller farms or just price them out completely by subsidizing lab-grown meat. So real meat is going to become too expensive due to less farms being allowed to make it. Lab meat will become cheaper because of subsidizing. Real meat is going to have more taxes imposed on them, and raising animals is going to have more laws and regulations to make it harder. Sounds crazy, right? But we have already seen this happening in some states where they are banning having chickens in your backyard. Because of those price changes, the middle and lower class are going to be forced to buy lab meat. Then they're going to hit us with different brands of lab-grown meat to give us the illusion of choice. And finally, the government will have full control of our food.
Wonderful.
In closing, I see the draw to lab-grown meat. With the many theoretical and wishful thinking possibilities here, who couldn't? Disease-free meat, less climate concerns, cruelty-free, possibly greater food yields. But from my own research, these things just seem to be exactly that, theoretical and wishful thinking. I hope years from now I look back on this and I'm wrong. And if you're watching this in the future and I am wrong, please tell me. It just seems to me that most of these promises can't be delivered. But what do you think? Are you more worried or excited for this? Are you hopeful or are you doubtful? Let's talk about this in the comments because I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this. Also, a small update that I do need your input on. This episode took 29 hours from start to finish to research and edit. So I completely underestimated that. I said that before I actually got into the editing portion. It was a little bit more like 42 hours. So if you guys really enjoyed this video, obviously a lot of work goes into it, and if you'd like to support in any kind of way, I did recently add an option at buymeacoffee.com/AndrewPFM, which should be in the description of some or most of these videos. But I'm looking to bump these episodes to weekly instead of twice a month. While it does take a lot of effort, it is something that I want to do if that's something that you guys want. So if you're interested in that, please let me know that in the comments as well. And if you want to contact me for coaching or for nutrition plans, go to my website, pridefitness.us, and fill out that form for a consultation. Everything I do is custom made based on you. So until next time, guys, my name is Andrew with Pride. See you later. I bet you guys did not expect that deep of a dive and for it to be that crazy, did you? Well, if you want something just as wild, hit the video right there. That one that's linked up top. Or if you want to see what I've been up to more recently, that bottom one is my most recent video. See ya.